Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this event together with Ita Pares. Ideasi. I would like to tell you and to acknowledge that I would like to acknowledge that IDRC's head office in which we are gathered today, situated on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people whose stewardship of the land and waters we now call Ottawa dates back to time immemorial. Indigenous knowledge is strongly linked to the land and ways of life, and as an organization supporting and sharing knowledge in Canada and internationally, this acknowledgement means reaffirming the value of local and indigenous knowledge and also of indigenous sciences. Our acknowledgement also aims to recognize the history and experience of colonization. We know that much work remains to be done on the path of reconciliation, including through decolonizing knowledge and science, and this is a reflection of our commitment to continue to support and honor indigenous and local voices. Thank you very much, and as we would say, midwet. We know that we are here today because of the rights of LGBTQIA plus people in Latin America and other places of the world. There are many challenges to be dealt with, but there are also many accomplishments. And in this event, we have distinguished guests that will discuss not only the challenges, but also the successes they've had in their communities and their accomplishments. We know that many of these accomplishments, also in Latin America, we have beautiful laws, but there is a huge gap between legislation and the reality in the field experienced by the population and at the local level. We have multiple challenges, huge challenges. We have hate, discrimination, marginalization, criminalization, not only by the community in general, but also by their own families and their own communities. There are also awful realities such as forced displacement and a large number. This is the interpreter speaking. We are waiting for the audio to come back. Thank you. So they are looking to fight against this criminalization not only in their daily life, but also in the virtual life. This is a problem that we are facing increasingly. So there is a vicious circle to deepen these violences and these hatred speeches that look to promote division and also social polarization. And they also contribute to the acceptation and legitimization of those violences that we've mentioned. So this instrumentalization for political purposes worry us very much. And of course, trans women are the most affected. They lack opportunities, they lack access to health. People with HIV do not have access to medicine, and also those people who are forced to be mobilized. So we will listen about this, and we'd like to know what happens with rural populations because we hear a lot about urban populations. What about their cases? They are not homogeneous populations. There are very different cases for gay men or if it is trans women, and it is not the same to be lesbian and to be lesbian and an indigenous woman. we will hear about these testimonies as well today. I'd like to say that, of course, there is a lot to be done. We have to know a lot more about this population. There is a lot of research and data missing, and that is what we would like to promote the research in this sense. And we have to go through this path of research for it not to be only um, of these populations, but also in a cross-cutting manner in order to have better data. And in this way, it will be easier to change these negative speeches and for them to become positive speeches. We will have a very powerful conference that will this here in Ottawa, Canada, that will discuss solidarity and the union of of our agendas to defend these populations and to we are here today to know more about what is going on in Latin America. Thank you, Tapares, for being here today. We know you have been a great ally in order to promote these rights and to defend these peoples in Latin America. So let me please introduce very briefly our speakers today, the people who are here with us. We have Mónica Estefania Chupcal.
She's a Mayan woman who inhabits her plural spirit as a trans woman that has been subjected to the violence of capitalist, colonial, machista, hegemonic temporalities. She comes from the Jalanil Akekchi resistance in Guatemala. Monica is an activist and human rights defender who has participated in panels at local, national, and international platforms to give visibility to the existence of the bodies and struggles of indigenous peoples. She provides accompaniment to victims of sexual violence, people living with HIV, and persecuted human rights defenders, among others. Monica is the first indigenous trans woman in her territory to make public political advocacy, demanding her community's rights before governmental and non-governmental entities. Aquí a mi derecho está Danilo. Danilo Manzano has been an activist for LGBTIQ rights for 18 years. Danilo is the director of the foundation Diálogo Diverso that works to promote and defend human rights with an emphasis on LGBTIQ plus people, gender, and democracy. He is also a board member of Dignity Network and a renowned figure, I would say political figure, to promote LGBTIQ rights at regional and international level. Luego tenemos aquí a Valentina Parra. Valentina Parra, she's a feminist lawyer with a minor in social psychology. She's part of the Peace and Transitional Justice team at Colombia Diversa, a respected non-governmental organization advocating for the rights of LGBTIQ plus community. In that role, Valentina accompanies justice-seeking processes for women and LGBTIQ plus victims of sexual and gender-based violence. This has involved advocacy, the construction of a technical legal arguments, and strategic litigation. I think it's a key issue, strategic litigation for cases of gender persecution before the special jurisdiction for peace in Colombia. Her work has focused on constructing innovative approaches to apply international law to transitional justice context with a gender perspective. Next, Natalia Cruz is a queer human rights defender and feminist. She currently works as a program officer with Fondo Lunaria, a Colombian feminist organization that mobilizes financial resources in support of diverse groups and organizations. These organizations are mainly comprised of young women with few possibilities of accessing economic resources. Fondo Lunaria's goal is to promote and strengthen initiatives for the political participation of youth as agents of change and social justice. She is a specialist in human rights pedagogy with additional training in gender, feminism, sexual and reproductive rights. And last but not least, Fernando Us Alvarez is a Maya Kikche indigenous person, a survivor of Guatemala's civil war and a sexual dissident. For the past 6 years, Fernando has been working with the Pan American Development Foundation with responsibilities for supporting LGBTIQ plus groups in the Mesoamerican region, encompassing in Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Prior to that, Fernando worked as a popular educator with UTFEGUA, the Unit for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders, an organization defends the political space for human rights organizations and provides support to human rights defenders under threat. Uh, I just and I won't read everything, but I just want to say also, Fernando is a founding member of Red Mutrans, the multicultural network of trans women, a grassroots group comprised in large part by indigenous trans women from several rural departments of Guatemala. Fernando is an activist in the struggle against racism towards indigenous peoples in Guatemala and within the LGBTQ community itself. She is also a member of Dignity Network of Canada's Dignity Worker Network on the Global Advisory Board. And also Bill Fairbairn is a Canadian human rights activist who has worked with respected Canadian human rights and international development organizations, as well as academic institutions for the past 4 decades. He currently lives in Santa Marta in Colombia, but recently returned to his former position at Interpares, a position he held between 2011 to 2022. As a Latin American program manager, Bill's work at Interpares has focused largely on sexual and reproductive health, LGBTQ two-spirits plus indigenous people's rights, and migrant justice. He represents Interpares on Dignity Network Canada, as you heard already, a Canadian national network that supports the human rights of people regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression and sex characteristics. And also Bill serves as a board member of our project, which IDRC supports with Colombia, Diversa Diálogo Versa, on LGBTIQ migrants in 8 countries. And we are now expanding, I think, to 11 countries already, right? Okay, bueno, voy a cambiar entonces al español.
Let's begin then with some of the questions that we prepared for today. We have some moments in order to answer these questions. We will start with Fernando. Fernando, could you tell us how you became interested in this issue? Why you got involved? Tell us briefly about your organization, your work, your community, please, in order to better understand what your organization is doing at the community level. Thank you. Thank you, Marcos. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all of you to be here from all over the world. Thank you. My name is Fernando Uz. Uz is a Maya name that means mosquito, and it belongs to the Quiche people. In my country, we have 23 language communities, and I belong to one of them. I believe that working in the defense of human rights can be by option or by a condition, so to speak. And in my case, it was the latter. In Guatemala, the last armed conflict, as you may know, lasted from 1960 up to the signature of the peace agreements in 1996. And the UN established that 93% of the criminalities and atrocities committed against indigenous communities was organized and committed by the army and by state forces. Out of those victims that the Truth Commission mentions, my village was destroyed. My father was murdered in 1980, November 1980, and just a few years ago, my father was declared as a martyr for the truth. And even though I'm not Catholic, I believe that this is important because the Vatican admits that there's been political violence against those who defended peace. With my family, we arrived at the city. We were internally displaced, and I had my own questions as to why we were in the city, why we were living there, how did that happen? And I think that those questions started to make sense for my work at the time, and that work in order to defend human rights was not enough. I started building my own story, constructing my own story, and I realized that I was not heterosexual. That is why I became involved in the fights and struggles for the defense of sexual identities as a survivor and as a Maya. Thank you very much, Fernando. I consider myself an activist in the defense of human rights and an independent one. I worked in LGBT organizations where I believe there there is no real democracy, and managers and in general of those organizations as are cisgender men, and they are not very open to listen to other voices. That is why I decided not to become involved in these organizations, and I consider myself an independent activist. I work for organizations where I get paid a wage, and I try to develop my own activist in that framework. Right now, I'm here with a work permit that, for instance, the organization where I work for gave me a permission in order to be here for a week. Thank you, Natalia. Would you like to go on? Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here to share this space with you, with all these powerful people. I am Natalia Cruz. I was born in a very small village in the center of Colombia. It is a city that historically is very religious, very Catholic, with many Christian and evangelic churches. And I started fighting for human rights because in Colombia the social movement, the social fight is very active, and with the social outburst and many other things, the repression of the state was something very real and very complex. So I started going through this path of the defense of human rights. I think this is one of the first spaces where I can publicly say that I'm a queer woman. Queer or marica in Spanish can be very offensive in some contexts. We are working to reivindicate this concept as a diverse woman. I don't speak publicly about this, and there should be no reason for this, but it is the case. And to name yourself and to say who you are is also a political act. Nowadays, I work with Fondo Lunaria, that is a feminist movement in order to gather funds for young trans women and trans women and young women, because we are the ones who have less possibilities to access resources, and we believe that it is the young people who can fight for these social reivindications in order to have a country that is free of racism and discrimination in general. Thank you.
Gracias. Muy buenos.
Yeah, Monica, go ahead. Good morning, everyone who's watching us online as well. Monica was born in a context of racism, discrimination, exclusion, and lack of visibility. What do we mean by this? Monica realized very early on that there was no visibility about our existence in indigenous populations. And so this stirred a transformational process in terms of establishing and asserting herself. This started out in 2014. I was very young then. I'm 32 years now. I was never a person who lived in the closet. And I want to highlight this, especially in the context of a sexist society. But it's interesting how, within the violences that our fellow trans indigenous women have experienced, that led me to start advocating publicly in this topic. in from this violence, I could see that this affected our context as trans women who have been attacked. They attacked our own fellow advocates. And so that made Monica say, we need to reclaim our right and demand our right. And we need to no longer exert violence on ourselves. And so from 2014, I started this transformational process in several spaces at different organizations. And then I realized that within the community, there was plenty of racism. We noticed that it was in those spaces that there was no dialogue and no visibility of our own voices. No one was listening to them. Sometimes our struggle has been instrumentalized. Our stories have been instrumentalized. So that has been something I've questioned and challenged in Guatemala in LGBTIQ plus organizations upon seeing how our existence is instrumentalized and how many times other people speak on behalf of us without understanding our contexts. And many times they will say that everything is okay when clearly there's a racism situation of displacements, a poor economic situation that has led us to violent scenarios. So that's the starting point for Monica. But she's also continued working with organizations. In 2017 until 2021, I worked for the organization because I realized about all these other situations that were happening in this space. And so since then, I've been an independent activist. I've worked with many fellow advocates, and I see that they have plenty of needs. But I also think we need to become aware of how a lot of this has been invisibilized for so many years. And when talking about this topic, for me, it's about hoping that there will be 100% acceptance, but truthfully, that's not the case. Sure, talking about rural indigenous communities, we can try to do that, but we haven't gotten to that level yet. We continue walking our path and our territories. We continue betting on our rights, demanding our rights. In my territory, I was the first trans woman who was part of social struggles and social demonstrations demanding rights, something that no one had done before in that position. In Guatemala, no one speaks for us. No one really invites us over to discuss this. The people who are in the outside departments or in the outskirts, no one is there. And we are in the territories though. So from that perspective, we are also fighting for our territories. We've managed to occupy several spaces, even though I understand that occupying those spaces and sharing them involves many challenges. And many times, our participation is not taken into consideration. That does not mean we're going to back down. We continue pushing forward and demanding our spaces and demanding to be heard. So I started this path in defending human rights. By walking this path, I've tried to visibilize our existence. I've also demanded that our rights be ensured because that has been our priority. And we won't allow further instrumentalization of our existence because we have our own struggles and our own struggles need to be visible. We can no longer be invisible in this patriarchal society. Thank you, Monica. Danilo, thank you. I'm very happy to listen to my fellow advocates here. I believe activism in human rights with an LGBTIQ plus perspective connects us a lot more and makes us wonder about what spaces uh, make us want to leave or get out of the closet. It depends a lot on our experiences, the family you were brought up into, your opportunities, access to basic utilities. So, leaving the closet involves many things, and it also involves further decisions. Some people want to stay in the closet for a little while longer, and that's respectable, but others decide something different altogether. And their thinking is if I'm not fine here, then I will find places where I can be fine. Maybe they rely on their family, your friends who become your family. And so that stirs an entire search process. What prompted me personally to work on LGBTQI plus migration? First, seeing how two of my best friends decided to leave Ecuador because they couldn't get out of the closet, they couldn't experience their sexuality in full. And so one of them moved to Europe, the other one moved to USA. Now they're fine. They're doing very well. Of course, they had to renounce to their family and their upbringing, but they were on this quest to find ways to experience their sexuality and also to find new economic means of livelihood. Then, since 2018, there's been this massive wave of immigrants from Venezuela. Venezuela is actually one of the countries with the least policies in terms of human rights. There's an ongoing situation of violence against human rights. And so that has caused the LGBTIQ plus community in particular to also emigrate. In 2018, I had the chance to work with a program on LGBTIQ plus at the social media level. That was a space that involved a lot of direct consumption in terms of understanding what LGBTIQ plus was. And we noticed a large part of the Venezuelan community asking for support. They asked us for help in healthcare and in other areas. And what I did, because I didn't have an organization at the time, was to refer them to people. I refer them to friends of mine who were lawyers who might be able to help them pro bono and efficiently. And we noticed these requests were increasing on time because it's a word of mouth situation, it replicates. And so Gabi and Jorgito, who are two of my greatest friends in Ecuador, we decided to come up with Diálogo Diverso. This is a platform. And for me, I I see myself as a person who accompanies some processes in this platform. We have four core areas of work, and what we've loved about the last few years is to see this change that the organization is undergoing. Right now, I really like to see the empowerment of all the people who started working with us. We have a lesbian peer or advocate. Her name's Sophie. She's a journalist and a communicator. She's excellent at what she does. She's currently in charge of leading a network of lesbian and queer women. And so this organization is a platform for those people who are eager to lead activist movements and can do so. And most of these networks are led by LGBTIQ plus people. lawyers, etc. In fact, two of our leaders are trans people. The goal for us is that people here achieve their dreams through our platforms. We see that many LGBTIQ plus people do not have the right resources, do not know how to access them. So our organization is there supporting them, and that's what motivates me and what motivated me in the past. Thank you, Danilo. Let's start with another round of questions. I'd like to explore a bit more some topics. Hello, I'm Valentina Parra. I work in the team of Peace and Transitional Justice in Colombia Diversa. And I arrived here in this path of transformational justice from a place of privilege. As Fernando said at the beginning, there are two options. I chose to be here. It wasn't something that others decided for me, but I do feel it as a responsibility because of my privilege. Because I was born in a city, I did not experience firsthand armed conflict in Colombia. This armed conflict has been going on for over 50 years and has affected civil society in a myriad of forms. I grew up watching this conflict on the TV through a screen. I was acquainted with some cases, but it was never really a reality for me. And I even had the privilege to undergo formal education. And then I understood a bit more what this armed conflict was. And I felt deeply touched and called upon to do something. I felt I had been numbed until then as part of a society. And how is it possible that everyone is aware of what's going on in the city, while in other places of Colombia, these horrible things are happening? I wear my lawyer hat pretty much most of the time, but my passion is social psychology. And it is by studying social psychology that I understood how an effect of social conflict is the normalization of violence. And so I understood that it's not normal for my family, my household, my school to continue with their lives as if nothing had happened. Basically, these acts of violence should not happen. And we all have a responsibility to work from our different roles to transform these realities, which should never be accepted or normalized. And so that's how I came to Colombia Diversa. Colombia Diversa has been working for nearly 20 years for defending the rights of LGBTIQ plus people. And I came here without really knowing the full dose of reality that being part of this team meant. Because many times in Colombia, there seems to be a lot of information about armed conflict and a lot of information about the rights of LGBTQI plus people, but no one really connects them together. The things that happen in war only happen to quote unquote real men or to women who are victims. But there was no connection between these two realms. And so when we asked for data, for figures, no one found them. And we asked people, why is there no information about this? Well, that didn't happen, was what we got. Of course, LGBTQI plus people were not part of the war, and there were no victims because they were never part of it. And what we found as we explored a bit more is that there were, in fact, many cases of violence. But this information was isolated. And if there's a criminalization plan, there's always a policy in place, there's a quote unquote normal way in which this transcends. But because LGBTIQ plus people were also clandestine at the time, whatever happened to them was not recorded. And so when we started looking for this information, trying to find what happened, we found that very cruel acts had happened in Colombia, and especially in the rural areas. And all these acts were connected and were connected and had a discrimination purpose behind, because they wanted to change or eliminate this undesirable or contagious trait in these people. And from then on, we've promoted a strategy that's based on research, on strategic litigation, and the construction of the country's memory. And we've also done this with advocacy to visibilize the impact of this armed conflict. Most of these people are peasants, indigenous people, black people. And we also need to figure out what needs to be done to keep this from happening again. What needs to be done to transform society so that nobody pretends that nothing happened. We should all change something in ourselves to keep this from happening again.
Fernando, vamos a continuar y con
Fernando, let's move to the second round of questions and with your answers and reflections. Could you please explain to us what have been the most relevant challenges you have faced, and also which are the strategies, the plans, the tools you used in order to face these challenges? Thank you. It's a very complex question because it is related to our life experiences, in my case, to my life experience. But I'd start by saying that Guatemala is a racist country as a result of the colonization processes we've gone through in Central America and Latin America. And as part of this colonial process, our bodies have been racialized and as well as our relationships. So to start, I would say that as a citizen from Guatemala and as a racist country, my first identity and reaffirmation of identity is to declare myself Maya, and that was not a spontaneous decision. It, it was related to this peace path in 94, 96 with the Commission of Truth, and by the Truth Commission, and by the time I was an adolescent, and I had to think about which was my identity in that context, in that story, in that history. The greatest challenges we have to face is to move to the cities because that is what I had to do, and that meant to be unaware of what was the context. I didn't know that territory. I lived in this displacement, and that is a great challenge, and at the same time, gives us great possibilities because we know the white people, but they don't know our world. And for us, this is a huge learning, and we have to learn about it. I had I was glad to meet a lot of people throughout my youth in the city and also in my work life. People from different contexts, from different places that supported this revindication process I was going through. Bill was one of them. Bill suggested me to become a part of Dignity Network Canada as an advocate. It's a platform that I didn't know very much and that I don't know very much, but I'm there because there were people that proposed those spaces. Marcos, the Maya people has a lot of continuity. Even though we've suffered racist and racial processes, in spite of the genocide and the last war we went through, Guatemala is a country that tries to assimilate indigenous people. And unfortunately, if we compare it with the revendication with the LGBTQA plus, I think this denomination, this acronym, tries to homogenize sexuality and sexual identities, and I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel represented by that. That is why I try to build my own path. Thank you, Fernando. We are seeing your presentation on the screen to provide context. Thank you so much for that. Monica, you have the floor. Yes, we are fighting in different contexts, in different ways. To fight in the context where I come from is very hard, very hard. We had to face many challenges, and in order to fight against this, we must have strength and a strong foundation. In my case, it was my family where I had their acceptance in spite of the fact that I grew in an illiterate family with that we had to face a vulnerability situation, and in spite of this I didn't have to displace myself to another city or to another place, so this helped me to stay, to decide to stay and to say no, we are not going to accept that we are displaced internally or to other cities because we have the right to be there. When we talk about internal displacement, this comes about when we have peers that are not accepted by their families or their communities. This is hard to face because the solution is to leave. We have no choice. We cannot stay. So this is a very strong fight in rural communities for us and for um, indigenous peoples to accept that you're trans, that you're indigenous, and that you wear the clothes you wear, and that you speak the language you speak. This sometimes leads to discrimination and racism. We are in a very difficult context, and very few of us uh, tolerated or tolerate to be here because we are constantly, daily repressed in the spaces where we live. You cannot fully live your life, do whatever you want. You live a life that is full of violence. So I believe that we have to take into account this approach and to see which have been our challenges and those obstacles we had to face. Thank you very much. I would like to be very specific about my answer. Could we please read the question again? Yes. Which are the challenges and the strategies you use to face those challenges? Yes. The challenges are the ones we are analyzing with and that we face with the organization. In Diálogo Diverso, we fight together with the people, and we can say that we were the first example of the first generation to declare the importance of research. We knew that we had migrants that were LGBT, we knew there were needs, we already knew this, but we didn't know which were these needs exactly and how we could start working. So we created this center in order to identify the needs and to get in touch with those who had a lawyer, who had a doctor or who could receive uh, food. And people told us, thank you very much, but where I got medical attention, I was not well received, or they questioned why did I have a different name mm, on my identity document. So we needed to go further to have our own to do this extra mile and to have our own doctor, our own lawyers, and we also realized that it was better if these professionals were part of the community. So the model, the approach of Diálogo Diverso is constructivist and based on this cross-cutting approach within the organization of the people we provide services to. And we need to know this. People don't know their rights. If people, local people, are not aware of their rights, the migrant population, LGBT migrant population, don't know their rights either. So it's important for us to think about how we believe people receive information. Migrants nearly have no phones, no access to phones, so we organize fora in order to um, disseminate this information, these rights, and if we organize a webinar, for instance, those who don't have phones or access to internet will not receive this information. So we have to think about the needs of these people and to connect with their project because within LGBT organizations, sometimes we believe that deconstruction is everything, but that's not the case. On many occasions, we need to ask people what is their dream, where are they heading, what are their projects for the future, without leaving aside the fact that people make their own decisions, whether good or bad. They need to be autonomous to make those decisions. And I think our approach in this sense was the right one. Regarding challenges, we need to think about how we systemize this information in order to create transformation at the political level. Ecuador is a good country regarding public policies. These are policies that have no resources. We have no professionals with the necessary training, so we are wasting our time in a sense, and people do not get what they need. Civil societies are not entitled or have not the burden to guarantee these freedoms. The state should guarantee this. Unfortunately, this is not the case in my country. So for me, challenges are lack of knowledge, inability to access information, and lack of resources for public policies. Thank you very much. Valentina? Yes, I think this is a very large question, but I think that facing the main challenges that we've faced so far, I think that as we were discussing earlier today, the importance of research and the production of information, qualified information in order to make informed decisions for prevention. We've seen there are many contexts of violences that are very complex, and we are focused on responding to this violence instead of focusing on prevention. So we should think about how can we prevent this violence, and in the event it occurs, how can we do this? And that would mean that we failed at the prevention stage. So I think that many of the answers to the challenges are related to prevention, as I said. So all strategies should be to think about how can we prevent this from happening and how can we guarantee that this will not happen again. We need a cultural change, a cultural transformation, and cultural transformation is a long run transformation process. This is not something that we will be able to achieve in a year or in a meeting. We need to have these difficult conversations, these negotiations, and to do this one at a time. This takes time, and I think that this will be the way to build peace with people who are ready to have these conversations, such as the organization in Colombia that had more resources. And of course, we've produced information, but not taking into account these new methodologies. We need to think about how to do a more ethical and collaborative research. As an organization, we have a responsibility to review our processes, to analyze what is going on within our organization, how can we improve our strategies at a technical level that will have an impact at the political level. Another challenge in Colombia, and I believe throughout the world, is to have a better understanding of what gender is. Because 10 years ago, when we discussed gender, we thought about women and with just one kind of women, white, cisgender, I mean, one kind of women. And I think that the advance of reproductive rights and this cross-cutting aspect of this topic helps us to think about this in a different approach without dividing people and putting them in different boxes because in reality this is a very flexible, we are very complex uh, human beings and this happens all the time. We cannot be categorized so firmly or so in an inflexible manner. We need to take into account the complexity of human beings, of human existence, and I think that these classifications sometimes are artificial in a way, and they do not contribute to this peace process, peace building process. I think this is a very important, essential process that we managed to visualize in Colombia. But the conflict is not over. Apart from the peace treaty that was signed in 1996, we still have fights with other groups that are translated into huge risks in the field. And for those who are going through these transition processes, Colombia is not a safe place for the defense of human rights, and it's even more dangerous for those who defend the rights of LGBTQ plus because um, it's not considered as something legitimate, such as the defense of the environment, because as Marcos said at the beginning, sometimes it is believed that the this will cause homosexuality to expand or as if it were something contagious if we started talking about this. It's seen as something as dangerous practices. So I go back to the beginning. We need to start by prevention in Colombia and throughout the world. We've had meetings with colleagues from all over the world, and we all had the same questions. How can we do what can we do in order to defend human rights in this context of crisis? So once again, we talk about this cross-cutting and intersection approach, and also the importance of defending LGBT leaders, Afro-American people, those who live in places abandoned by the state. And the response by the state is to send a white person to accompany that person in the territory. And that creates more visibility, puts that person more at risk, and it is part of the misunderstanding or not understanding correctly which are the elements of conflicts, and having an approach of security as something that is not holistic. We are talking about not only safety as not to be killed, but also to have our needs met. So we need to have a more cross-cutting and more feminist or more holistic view in order to not repeat these violences. Thank you.
Como fondo,
Thank you, Natalia. Well, for us, the challenge was to find resources to democratize our actions in the territory and bring it to the grassroots organizations. The communities and organizations we supported are our fellow advocates who are there on site and they experience this oppression firsthand. An oppression that is structural and cultural in nature and that stems not from a single actor but from many. For example, a few weeks ago, 8 trans women were killed across different parts in Colombia. It's very complex because the context in Colombia, what with the regulations, uh, could hint that on paper there's plenty of access to justice and other resources. For example, trans people could, in theory, change their gender on their ID card. Legally, you could get it done, but pragmatically, there are many obstacles. They need resources to get this done. For instance, trans men trans men whose gender is marked as male on their ID need to go to the military service. And then there are other barriers in terms of rights and other type of barriers. And picking up on what Valentina said about intersectionality, there may be a person who is disabled, black, bisexual, or lesbian. You know, I'm thinking specifically of a fellow advocate. And so your body in that situation experiences multiple types of violence. And the question is how to materialize that intersectionality in what we do so it's not only theoretical. Because now in many spaces there's a lot of talk about responsibility, about acknowledging all voices, but we need to see what voices are being involved. In the LGBTI world is still very patriarchal in nature because normally it's cisgender men who are there. You know, there's like this scale. You are a cisgender man, and then the rest of the intersectionalities follow. And that's what we saw in many of the panels we were part of. So the intersectionality of trans women, lesbian women, bisexual women, and other types of their existence and worldviews entail different types of violence, which I think is worthy to start naming. And also, I'd like to add that there's a trans excluding feminism. So there are many right wing and far right wing alliances that are mobilizing against trans people. And there are several bills that are being drafted that are anti trans. And so this opens up the discussion as to who is being part of that, who are behind that. Normally, it's feminist women, typically privileged white women, who are mobilizing these type of speeches. And that's something worth thinking about, because these alliances have this extreme form of feminism, and many cisgender women are now leaning towards that type of movement that is ableist, racist, and yeah, those are some of the challenges. Now, when it comes to strategies, some of the responsibility lies in the state, because it is the state that goes against these rights. And then there are other collective organizations that take up these cases, analyze them, and try to see how to adapt that to each scenario, because what happens in Bogota is not the same as what happens in other indigenous communities or in rural areas or in other locations. So for us, this network of community care is very important. In some cases, for example, if a woman needs to leave her territory right away, she can resort to the network. And in that case, we look for allies. So that's an example of how these care networks work. And just some food for thought. What we're looking for with this fund is to reivindicate activism. Fernando said it at the beginning. Activism is a very complex task. And for many people, activism is a job. So dignifying activism is part of our mission, so that our fellow advocates who are in the territories can continue working on their path of defending human rights. Also, you want to have some time left to enjoy the fruit of your fight and to live that with dignity. So, as I was saying at the beginning, this is also a political bet, so that we can understand how these realities are part of the context and how we can go back to the communities so that they can use this knowledge to their advantage. Thank you, Natalia. It is certainly very important. You talked about the right to enjoy, the right to self-care, and the right to human health. So in this context, these networks of mutual care are very relevant. Moving on to the next set of questions. We're running out of time. Let's see. We'll try to summarize a bit more. What do you think are your most outstanding challenges or achievements in your struggle as an organization in the last few years in advancing human rights? Maybe highlight one or two of these achievements. Personally, I'm very happy to see that my contribution to activism meant that there's a generational gap. In Ecuador, there used to be a lot of fights in terms of accessing HIV funds, and there were many groups of people who were invisibilized. But now I see a new generation, and I see that we are doing LGBTQI plus activism, and we're even prepping the new organizations that will come. None of this is static in nature. So I'm very happy to see that we've managed to transform a little bit some of these places. Our program for LGBT migrant population has been very successful. We've gotten over 500 interventions, 5,000. And also, we've seen what is going on with the migration situation in Latin America and what responses we can give in this context. Also, the creation of this migration network, it involves about 11 countries, and we've tried to do collective work thinking about migration processes, focusing also on mental health. We care for increasingly larger numbers of people, and Canada has been very present in these topics from different angles. It was actually Canada, the country that allowed us to use this network. So those are the achievements I can share. Valentina, over to you. You talked about migration, and I know that in Colombia, uh, there's a. You also talked about violence. What would you like to tell us? On the one hand, thank you to IDRC. We've continued developing a protocol for cases of violence in Central America. And I think this is key to add further tools and institutionalization to what we do. And that way, this becomes more concrete. It's no longer part of people's imaginations, right? Because this is not the way things normally go. So when the prosecutor doesn't come across the typical case, many times their case is disregarded on the grounds of there not being enough information. So what we want to do is to provide more and more tools through research so that there can be a hypothesis during an investigation. Because if a person is telling us about their case, we don't want that person to have to prove discrimination against them. Rather, we want the paradigm to shift a little. And I think that's important in any investigation process. And I also think it's important that spaces like this, spaces of exchange where we can learn from each other, that they're fostered, because definitely that exchange nurtures everyone. I think one of the greatest achievements in this transitional justice process in Colombia has been that for the first time we've managed to get recognition for LGBTQI plus persecution. Even though we know the limits of law, we know that naming things is important. And the people that we work with have stated that this power of naming and saying that something happened is important. Historically, there's been a lot of impunity, 20, 30, 50 years long since the armed conflict began. And like I said earlier on, this is not normal. And as an international community, we are certain that this should not happen. So visibilizing this is paramount. This is a larger achievement that involves daily achievements, and those are very important too. For example, a trans woman was recognized as a victim of her son's drafting, and that ended an entire legacy of re victimization. Before, in the past, they would say, trans woman, how can you be a mom? That's not possible. You becoming a mother is a hazard because probably your child will become gay. That was the thinking in the past. Or we're here to investigate what happened and to sanction the guilty people. Now comes the challenge of repair work, of course. And hopefully we can come up with ways to repair and restore this work, which goes beyond damage to victims, I think. Natalia? Thank you. Over the past 2 years, we supported 69 LGBTQI plus projects and organizations who recognize themselves as LGBTQI plus organizations. And it's important to highlight that as organizations, even though they don't recognize themselves as LGBTQI plus organizations, there are other trans, bisexual, lesbian people who have their own struggles. Many times there seems to be an exclusive factor as to being an LGBTQI person, but these people defend their rights to remain in the territory. They bet on creating a reality for everyone. They challenge state violence and the violence that goes on in their territories. And we're also betting on diverse families in an attempt to break away from the hegemonic perspective of families, mother, father, son. And so this is also what we're fighting for, the opportunity to visibilize other ways to become a family. There's another support program, a fund for movements to support activists. For example, if activists are in Cartagena and they need to do something in Bogota, that fund is available. It's an emergency fund that they can use and that has been used to support people in relevant places. Now, talking about a broader feminism, we organized a meeting of trans femininities at the time. And towards the end of May, we will organize the first national meeting of trans men, trans masculinities. And I bring this up because in women meetings, normally a lot of the support did not make it to trans men. Since 2023, we have been working consistently in bringing these types of support and raising visibility around this. So this is available to all trans people in all their diversities, regardless of their names. So that meeting is going to take place in late May. Also, we underwent some processes which we do not talk about so often, but these processes were transformational for us internally, and that's a little bit of what I can say about our achievements. Fernanda, could you repeat the question? Tell us maybe two or three achievements that you'd like to highlight. Rather than achievements, I would maybe recognize that the struggle for sexual diversity is a racialized struggle. It's a class struggle and it's a struggle about privilege. How I feel about this and or what makes me be energized is that indigenous populations are being present once again. This acronym needs to be discussed. This acronym needs to be deconstructed because I don't think people necessarily have autonomy when they don't have the resources. People who are typically autonomous are people who are privileged. So, indigenous peoples have resisted and endured historical colonization processes. So, what I will say is not really an achievement, but this talk about sexuality is a talk that involves tension within the indigenous communities because patriarchy and colonialism has permeated our communities. I see with great caution, and I'm increasingly scared of Monica, like for Monica than for myself, because Monica lives in the community. I think what she does is far riskier because I perceive that for me it's a lot easier to leave the city or leave the country, but Monica is in the territories, and for her to leave the place, the territories is harder. So there are fundamental institutions that have a key place. So I would like to call us to be very aware of this. People need to be able to object to what their religions are proposing. And then I would like to invite the Institute to consider pursuing research with indigenous populations as part of the reality because many times they're not visibilized. We've seen that many times we don't have access to education or we haven't had access to education in our own languages, but in a different language altogether. So this entire research of dynamics, research dynamics is very foreign to us.
Is
When we speak about achievements, I think we cannot talk about a colonized achievement because everything we've achieved on many occasions is through colonization. So the resistance we put up in our territories because we still have to resist this patriarchal system. We see that the colonization has imposed many situations on our population. As Fernando mentioned, sometimes it had an influence or it overcame our rights. So we need to think about the colonization when we talk about achievements. And I think that the fact that we are fighting from within our territories for our rights, this is very important in the racial context we have. In Guatemala, we can see how colonization is still present in the different social movements and that we've always been seen as an instrumentalization object. Since we are indigenous people, we were wear maya clothes, we are seen as an object. Like, you can dance, you can be seen here with your beautiful clothes, but that's not it. We need to reivindicate our fight for our rights, and feminism in Guatemala, they've had included trans people in their fight. As someone who has been present in social movements more focused in indigenous people, because when we talk about the defense of rights, we are also talking about the defense of our territory, our bodies. We have to defend them both. I participated in movements, but more focused on indigenous people because we need to decolonize many, many aspects of our struggle. So when I'm seen in the context of these fights, very often I'm attacked by feminist women. So there are many situations in which there is no visibility and of people like me, and we are not heard either. So we need to go on our debate. We need to take into account the point of view of those who are in the territory, and we cannot normalize many situations that are usually accepted. Many of the testimonies we are hearing today is thanks to the work of Itapares. So maybe, Bill, you'd like to share some thoughts? It would be very interesting to hear from you as someone who supports all these causes. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the IDRC. After hearing these testimonies, we I am really impressed by their courage and the challenges they need to face. We are always celebrating accomplishments, and I'm very happy for it because Itapara supports people, such valuable people. When Fernando described his story, his where he comes from in Guatemala, I was in Guatemala when Fernando's father was killed. I was a student in Guatemala. I studied there from September to December throughout the dictatorship of Lucas Garcia. It was a terrible time in Guatemala. I came back to Canada, and with some friends, we started a a movement of solidarity with Latin America. At the time, thanks to two lesbian women, they helped me to make my coming out in the 80s. It was not so easy to do. I worked with the solidarity movement for of solidarity with Latin America. I work with Interpares, which is an organization, a feminist organization that includes trans people that has been working for more than 50 years, supporting organizations in the global south and in Canada. Right now, we are supporting 75 organizations in 22 countries in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Canada who work with different topics. They support people in a certain context that work with different topics, not just one topic specifically. We work with organizations trying to support the work they do. because counterparties of interparties are the experts. It's not us. We're aware of this. So we need to listen to experts' voices and try to support them by providing funds, but not only. I think that a lot has to do with solidarity and interpares, that is to say, among peers, reflects our internal organization. We make decisions by consensus. Everyone earns the same wage, and there is a difference depending on the fact that they have people that depend on them or not. Otherwise, everyone has the same wage, from those who have 20 years old to those who have 6 years old. It's a philosophy of our organization to try to keep a horizontal structure, but also in the work with counterparties. We understand that when there are funds, when we have money, we have a certain power, so to speak, and there is the fact of having this power through money is contrary to the philosophy of our organization. The work in platforms and in coalitions is part of the Interpares DNA. We have a political orientation group that monitors the policy in Canada regarding Latin America. And we think about free trade agreements, for instance, the ones that Canada has with Colombia, now with Ecuador, and the concern that those treaties have elements that make Canadian companies able to create lawsuits against the different states. This is one of the concerns of the LGBTQ population. We have founding members of the Dignity Network organization that has now 68 organizations. We've spent time with Marcos there, and the coalition expands increasingly with people from the LGBTQI community and allies. From the Dignity Network, we have fostered the Canadian government to devote funds for the work of the South populations, and in 2019, the government announced a $30 million package, and a part of this is being administered by Equitas, that is administering a new fund that is called Acting Together for Inclusion, and with Interpares, we've managed to get funds in order to go on supporting the organizations that our counterparties supported before they received funds. So these funds are like a breath of air, of oxygen, in order to strengthen the support to the Guatemala organization, to an organization, and also for Colombia Diversa and others who make such an important work in order to defend the rights of the population and who make research as well. I'm encouraged by the history of Colombia when we have this truth agreement and peace agreement that has been reached. And I think it's an achievement for Colombia, but for the world as well. I congratulate the work of Colombia Diversa. At the time, they went to the Havana in order to foster this peace agreement for it to include the population. I think this is a pioneer work. I enjoy working with these fellow advocates, these peers. I think these are the most creative organizations who work very hard in order to um, create this awareness in the population. Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for providing this context. There's a lot to be said, but we're running out of time. I'd like to thank you all for the knowledge and the recommendations you've shared. I respect very much your work, your resilience, your resistance within your territory, and congratulations on this work that you do in order for us to rethink sexuality and to work in partnership and alliance with Interpares and of course with all of you. Thank you so much, and safe travels back home. Thank you so much.